I never thought I'd have to protect my baby from my own mother. It started on a cold November morning, the kind where the sky looked like wet concrete and the wind had a bite to it. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, bottle-feeding my newborn son, Noah, while watching dead leaves spiral in the backyard. My life had become quiet, not in a peaceful way, but in a kind of uneasy stillness, like the pause before a storm. I was 23, recently single, and a first-time mom. Noah was barely 3 weeks old. His father, Jason, had vanished as soon as he heard the word pregnant. I never expected help from him, but I never expected I'd need help from her either. My mother, Mom, had always been complicated. She was controlling, cold in ways that didn't show on the surface. The kind of person who smiled at neighbors and spoke sweetly in public but had a voice like ice behind closed doors. Still, when she offered to move in to help, I didn't have the strength to say no. I was exhausted, raw, and drowning in postpartum uncertainty. So I let her in. That was the first mistake. At first, she played the doting grandmother. She baked cookies, folded laundry, cradled Noah like he was made of glass. She'd whisper lullabies in his ear and tell me I needed to rest. It seemed like the help I so desperately needed. But soon, little things started to shift. She began questioning every decision I made. "You're not feeding him right," she'd say, snatching the bottle from my hand. "You don't hold him properly. You'll hurt his neck. He sleeps too much. You're probably drugging him with formula." It didn't feel like help anymore. Felt like surveillance. The house didn't feel like mine. She rearranged the nursery, locked some of the cabinets, even started managing my mail. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe she was just anxious, overbearing. But then the real horror began to take shape. It was subtle. She started disappearing with Noah during the day. "I'm just taking him for a walk," she'd say, already halfway down the driveway. An hour would pass. Then 2. Once she was gone for nearly 5. No texts, no calls. When I asked where she went, she waved me off. "Just around. You need rest, honey." But my instincts told me something wasn't right. One evening, I found a piece of paper folded into her purse while she was in the shower. A printed-out form from the Department of Child Welfare. It was partially filled out, with my name in the unfit parent section. I froze. My hands trembled as I read the lines. False allegations, mental instability, neglect, even a claim that I had once tried to abandon Noah at a fire station. All lies. When she came out of the bathroom and saw me holding the paper, her face didn't shift. No surprise, no guilt. She simply said, "You're not ready for a child." But I am. I stood in silence, gripping the paper so tightly it wrinkled in my fist. My pulse thundered in my ears. I wanted to scream, to throw her out, but I had nowhere else to go. No family. No job to afford rent on my own since I was still on maternity leave. She had me trapped, and she knew it. That night, I locked Noah's bedroom and slept with a chair pushed against my own door. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. And somewhere in my gut, I knew this wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was something far darker. The next morning, I noticed Noah's baby bag missing. The carrier, his formula tins, even his vaccination records were gone from the drawer. When I confronted her, she smiled calmly and said, "I'm preparing for emergencies, in case you do something reckless." My voice shook as I told her to stop, to leave us alone. But she just stared at me like I was the child again. "You're unstable, sweetheart. The baby doesn't cry when I hold him. He feels safe with me. Maybe you should take some time away and let me raise him right." Couldn't breathe. Was she serious? Did she actually believe this? That night, I took photos of everything. The forms, the missing supplies, even her emergency kit. I created a backup folder and emailed it to myself. I started documenting her behavior in a journal, even recording a few of her more aggressive statements on my phone, hidden in my hoodie pocket. She was trying to build a case. But so was I. The final straw came 3 days later. I woke up to find Noah missing. His crib was empty. No blanket. No bottle. The house was silent. My heart exploded in my chest as I ran through the rooms, calling his name, screaming for my mother. No answer. Then I saw the front door slightly ajar. I ran barefoot into the street. It was still dark out, the sky just turning from navy to gray. A neighbor's porch light flickered on across the road. And then I saw her, halfway down the block, stroller in hand, walking calmly like it was a Sunday morning stroll. I ran toward her, shouting, tears burning my cheeks. She didn't stop until I grabbed the stroller handles. "What are you doing?" I screamed. She looked at me with tired eyes, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "I was going to the station, to talk to someone." It's time someone stepped in. I was shaking, furious, terrified, and for the first time, something inside me snapped. I grabbed my phone and called the police. That was the beginning. The moment I realized that if I didn't fight back now, I might never see my son again. She had built her plan like a web, slow, quiet, sticky. But now she'd gone too far, and I was done being afraid. What I didn't know was that she had already been to the authorities, that a case file already existed, that a social worker was scheduled to visit, and her lies were deep enough to threaten everything I had. The next chapter of this nightmare was about to unfold, and I was about to discover just how far my own mother would go to steal my child. I didn't sleep the night after calling the police. After the officer arrived, everything became a blur of questions and stifled rage. I kept repeating that my mother had taken my baby without consent, that I feared for our safety. But she was calm, collected, even maternal. She told the officer I was exhausted, paranoid, and dealing with postpartum psychosis. She even offered him tea. I tried to show him the printed form, the one where she accused me of being unfit, but she claimed it was just a draft from a friend's case. The officer didn't arrest her. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply told us to take a breath and figure things out. Then he left. I stood in the hallway clutching Noah, feeling helpless. That night, I locked my bedroom, called a locksmith to change the house locks the next day, and began reaching out to people I had pushed away during the pregnancy. Friends, old coworkers, anyone. I needed support. I needed a way out. But my mother wasn't done. Not even close. 2 days later, a woman from Child Protective Services knocked on my door. Her name was Marla. She wore a cardigan, spoke softly, but I saw it in her eyes, suspicion. I invited her in, even offered her the same chair where my mother once sat smugly knitting baby socks. Marla asked questions. "How often do you sleep? Have you ever left your baby unattended? Do you have any history of depression, anxiety, or other mental illness?" It was clear. My mother had filed a report. Formal one, with specific accusations. She had told CPS that I had violent outbursts, that I yelled at Noah and once let him cry for hours without feeding him, that I screamed about hearing voices, that I had postpartum rage and was an unfit mother. I was horrified. I had never laid a finger on my baby. I cherished every sleepless night, every diaper change, every second holding his tiny body against my chest. Sure, I was tired. Sometimes I cried when he cried. But I loved my son more than I'd ever loved anyone in my life. I showed Marla the files I had saved, the photos, the documents, the voice recordings. I played a clip where my mother said coldly, "You won't even notice when he's gone. You're not meant to raise him." Marla's eyebrows lifted slightly. She took notes, promised to follow up. Then she left, quietly, like a shadow. I thought I had done enough, but things only escalated. My mother began making late-night calls. I could hear her from her bedroom on the phone with someone, whispering. Sometimes she'd cry, other times she'd laugh bitterly. And then one morning, she was just gone. Her room was empty. Her clothes, her toothbrush, even her knitting bag. A note sat on the kitchen counter in tidy cursive. "I'm doing what's right. You'll thank me someday." My stomach turned. I checked on Noah immediately. He was safe, still asleep, his breath warm and soft. I pressed a kiss to his forehead, but I couldn't shake the fear curling in my gut. Hours passed. Then I got the call. The voice on the other end was from an out-of-state attorney. He was confused but firm. My mother had contacted him, claiming custody of Noah was pending transfer, due to concerns about my mental fitness. She had even attempted to file for emergency guardianship. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I hung up and called Marla from CPS directly. She didn't answer, but her voicemail said she'd return calls within 24 hours. That entire day, I sat by the front window, holding Noah close, rocking back and forth in an old glider chair. Every time a car slowed outside, my heart jumped into my throat. Would she come back? Would she try to take him? That night, I heard glass shatter. It was 2:13 a.m. I leapt from bed, grabbed my phone and crept toward the sound. A small pane of glass in the back door was cracked, spiderwebbed in the center, like someone had tried to break in but gave up. I called the police. Again. This time, they took me more seriously. They filed a formal report, placed a temporary "do not approach" notice on my mother, and gave me a card for a family advocate center. The officer, younger than me, looked at me and said, "If someone's trying to build a case against you, it's time you start fighting like it's a war." That sentence haunted me, because this was a war, and the enemy wore my last name. I found an attorney the next morning, a woman named Janelle who specialized in family disputes and custody interference. When I explained the situation, she didn't blink. She told me she'd handled cases like mine before, too many. "Some grandmothers don't want to be grandmothers," she said. "They want a second chance at motherhood, at control." She helped me file for an emergency restraining order and pushed for a CPS review based on falsified claims. I handed over everything: recordings, timelines, written statements. And then, something unexpected happened. My mother showed up in court. She looked perfect. Pearls, hair curled, soft pink lipstick. She cried in front of the judge, claimed I had attacked her character out of guilt, said she only wanted what was best for our child. Our child. I nearly screamed. But then Janelle stood up. She played the recordings, read the emails, showed the original printed form, her draft custody claim. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft clicking of the judge's pen. My mother's face changed. The sympathy drained from her expression. She knew then her plan had cracked open. The judge didn't make a final ruling that day, but he granted the emergency restraining order. My mother was ordered to stay 300 feet away from Noah and me. All guardianship claims were frozen. CPS was instructed to begin a formal investigation, this time into her. That night, I held Noah tight against my chest. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. But it wasn't over, because the next day, I received a letter in the mail. A subpoena. She was suing for full custody. The subpoena hit me like a truck. I read the letter over and over, as if doing so would make it make sense. But it didn't. My mother was suing for full custody of Noah. The woman who had raised me with emotional distance, who had never shown affection, was suddenly fighting to take away my son. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. 6 weeks of anxiety, fear, and planning. I wasn't prepared. How could I be? I was still a new mom, struggling to find balance. How could I fight her in court? She had an army of resources while I had only Janelle, a lone attorney who was clearly stretched thin. I couldn't tell anyone about the lawsuit at first. I didn't want to burden my friends, and I didn't want to show weakness. But the weight of it, the thought that I might lose Noah, gnawed at me. I had to do something, anything, to take control back. Janelle advised me to gather more evidence. I went back through every phone call, every email, every incident. The evidence was damning. My mother's calculated actions, her manipulation, and her psychological control tactics were right there in black and white. I even dug deeper into her financial records and found proof of a large cash withdrawal shortly before she made her first custody claim. She had money to hire a lawyer and manipulate the situation further. The weeks that followed were an emotional blur. I spent my days prepping for court, and my nights holding Noah, telling him stories about how I was going to protect him, no matter what. I felt a deep sense of urgency. If I lost him, I didn't know what I'd do. This wasn't just a custody battle. It was a battle for his safety and his future. I also hired a private investigator, someone who could dig into my mother's past, someone who might uncover anything that could help us. What I discovered stunned me. My mother's history wasn't clean. Not at all. The investigator uncovered a pattern of control and manipulation in her relationships, with former partners, with family members, with even her closest friends. She had isolated people, turning them against each other, using guilt as her weapon. But what was most alarming was a report from a therapist she had once seen. The therapist had documented sessions where my mother admitted she wanted another child, even though she had been past her childbearing years. She had spoken about a deep, unfulfilled desire to be a mother again, to start over with someone new. That was the key. That was why she wanted Noah. She wasn't just being a grandmother. She was trying to relive her own version of motherhood, using my son to fulfill her own emotional gaps. I knew we had to act quickly. If the judge didn't see her for what she was, a woman with a dangerous obsession, Noah could be at risk. So I pressed forward with everything I had. I prepared for the courtroom, rehearsing my testimony and making sure that every piece of evidence I had collected was airtight. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way into my son's life. The day of the trial arrived faster than I anticipated. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping into an arena. The air was thick with tension, and the long hallway echoed with the voices of attorneys, clients, and strangers who were all part of this world I had no business being in. I was terrified, but I knew that I couldn't back down. I took a deep breath as I sat beside Janelle. I glanced at my mother, sitting with her lawyer across the room. She didn't look like the woman I had grown up with. There was nothing familiar about her now. She looked cold, like a stranger. The proceedings began. The judge, a stern but fair-looking man, sat at the front. He glanced at both of us before nodding to the lawyer to begin. My mother's lawyer went first. He presented her case with such calmness, such confidence, that for a moment, I doubted myself. He painted a picture of me as a struggling, unstable mother. He claimed that I was unable to care for Noah properly, that I didn't have the emotional capacity to provide a stable home for him. As I listened, I felt a wave of nausea. I could see my mother in the background, nodding as if she believed every word. She was a master at playing the victim, and her lawyer was brilliant at framing her as a compassionate, concerned grandmother. Then it was my turn. Janelle stood and opened the defense with one simple statement. This is not about my client's ability to care for her child. This is about a woman who is trying to take her grandchild under false pretenses. I stood up to testify, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at the judge and then at my mother. I could feel the weight of the room on my shoulders, but I wasn't afraid anymore. This wasn't about me, it was about Noah. I told the court everything. The manipulation, the false accusations, the controlling behavior. I presented the evidence. Emails, recordings, photographs. Each word I spoke felt like a catharsis. I no longer felt the fear of losing Noah. I felt the power of fighting for him, for his safety. When I reached the part about my mother's therapist's notes, there was a shift. I could see my mother's lawyer pause. For a moment, the facade cracked. My mother's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? I pressed on. I spoke about my love for Noah, my commitment to protecting him at all costs. I told the court that I wasn't perfect, that I was still learning, still adjusting to motherhood, but I was his mother, and that meant I would fight every day to ensure he never felt abandoned or unloved. When I finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. I sat back down, breathing heavily, feeling both drained and empowered at once. Now it was the judge's turn to decide. The weight felt unbearable. Every minute that passed felt like a year. I kept my eyes fixed on Noah, who was playing with his toy in the corner, oblivious to the battle unfolding around him. Then the judge stood. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, it is clear that the accusations against this mother have no merit. The petitioner's actions and claims are without foundation. Custody is awarded to the biological mother, with no changes to the current living arrangements. My heart exploded in my chest. I wanted to jump up, scream, shout. I wanted to hug Noah, hold him close, and never let go. But then I looked over at my mother. Her face had gone pale, her jaw clenched. It was over, and she knew it. It was over. The judge's ruling had shattered the carefully constructed world my mother had built around her plans. I could hear her muffled sobs as she stood to leave the courtroom, her hands clenched at her sides. Her lawyer tried to console her, but the weight of the loss was undeniable. I, on the other hand, felt like I was floating. The courtroom, which had felt like a battleground just moments before, now felt like a distant memory. I could breathe again. My baby was safe. My rights as his mother had been upheld. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt peace. But that peace was fleeting. As I left the courtroom with Janelle and Noah in my arms, I glanced back at the door. My mother was still there, speaking in hushed tones with her attorney. I couldn't tell if she was plotting her next move or simply trying to regain her composure. I didn't care. We were done. Or so I thought. The days following the court ruling were oddly quiet. Noah and I settled into our new routine. I made sure to keep a low profile. The last thing I wanted was for my mother to lash out, or for her to try something more desperate in the wake of her defeat. I thought about contacting my other family members, but when I tried, I kept getting vague responses. My aunts and uncles, who I had once been close with, avoided my calls. It wasn't until I heard through a distant cousin that they had all been subtly influenced by my mother. They believed her version of events. To them, I was the unstable one. But that didn't matter anymore. Noah and I had a chance to build our own family now. Together. A week passed then too. It felt like I was emerging from a fog. The constant stress, the fear, the anxiety slowly melting away. For the first time in months, I began to think about the future, about Noah's future, about our future. But then the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. It was my mother's voice on the other end. Calm, almost too calm. "I'm not done, you know?" My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "I'm not going to let you raise him. You don't deserve him." My throat tightened. I wanted to yell at her, to scream all the years of frustration and anger I had bottled up inside. But instead, I just stood there, speechless, my hands trembling around the phone. "Don't get comfortable, honey," she continued, her voice low and cold. "This isn't over. I'll make sure everyone sees who you really are." I ended the call abruptly, but the damage was done. The anger in her voice was undeniable. The finality of the court ruling had not silenced her. It had made her more dangerous, more desperate. Over the next few days, I noticed strange things happening. The back door was left ajar one evening, though I was sure I'd locked it. I found a broken garden gnome in the yard that I swore had been perfectly intact before. A package, a gift, perhaps, addressed to Noah, showed up at my doorstep with no return address. Inside, I found a cheap stuffed bear, its eyes sewn on unevenly, its smile too wide, like it was mocking me. I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother was still watching, still lurking, and I was right to be paranoid. One morning, I woke up to a notification from my bank. A large, suspicious charge had been made from my account. My mother's name appeared as the authorized user. It was a credit card application for a high-limit card, and she had used Noah's name as the cosigner. Panic surged through me. I called my bank immediately, canceling the transaction and freezing my accounts. But I knew this wasn't a mistake. My mother was trying to take control in any way she could. I immediately called Janelle and explained what had happened. She advised me to file another report, this time with the police for attempted fraud and harassment. But I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about power. My mother was trying to keep me on the defensive, to wear me down until I gave in. But I couldn't give in. Not now. The police took the report seriously. They tracked down the address where the card application had been sent from, and it led them straight to my mother's lawyer's office. She had been behind it all, orchestrating the attack in the shadows, pushing me to the brink. Couldn't believe it. Not only had she tried to take my son, but now she was trying to drain me financially. She was willing to do anything to strip me of everything I had worked so hard for. It was a chilling realization, but it also gave me the clarity I needed. The court victory wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The police investigation lasted a few weeks, during which my mother was placed under temporary surveillance. But her attempts to further disrupt my life were growing bolder. She started showing up at my workplace, lurking around the parking lot in her car. At one point, I caught her in the grocery store, eyeing me from across the aisle like a predator waiting for its next move. Every step I took, she was there. But every time I saw her face, every time she tried to interfere, I reminded myself of something. I had already won. We had already won. I wasn't going to let her take Noah. I wasn't going to let her break me down. As the months passed, the harassment lessened, and I began to think that maybe, just maybe, she had finally given up. But I couldn't let my guard down. I would never stop fighting for my son. The moment I did, she would take it all away. But then, one afternoon, as I was picking Noah up from daycare, I received another letter. This one, however, wasn't from a lawyer or the court. It was from my mother. In bold letters, it read, "This isn't over. You will regret this." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a drawer, knowing one thing for sure. I would never stop fighting for Noah. Not today. Not tomorrow. Never. The letter was a chilling reminder that I wasn't safe. Not yet. I spent the next few weeks in a heightened state of alert. Every time the phone rang or the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't shake the feeling that my mother was waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. But no matter how much she tried to push me to the edge, I knew one thing for certain. I would never give in. I would never let her win. The days blurred into each other. I focused on Noah, keeping him safe, keeping him happy, building a life for us in the small but warm home we had made together. There was so much love between us, so much joy in the simple moments. I wanted nothing more than for him to grow up knowing the security and comfort of a real family. A family where love was unconditional, not a tool for manipulation. But my mother's threats were never far from my mind. The police had warned me that even though she was under investigation, I couldn't let my guard down. The whole situation had changed me. I was no longer the carefree person I once was. I was a mother, a protector, a warrior. One afternoon, as I was leaving work, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, parked across the street from my house, was a car I recognized instantly. My mother's. It wasn't unusual for her to show up unannounced. But this time, there was something different. Her car was parked on the street, directly in front of my house, and she wasn't in it. She was nowhere in sight. I felt the air grow heavy with the weight of anticipation, of something about to happen. My stomach twisted in knots. I walked cautiously to the front door, Noah clutched in my arms. I locked the door behind me, but the sense of foreboding remained. That night, as I tried to settle Noah into his crib, I heard a knock at the door. It was quick, urgent. My heart pounded in my chest. I looked through the peephole and there she was, my mother, standing outside, her hands clasped together, her face wearing the same controlled expression that I had seen too many times before. I froze. My instinct was to not answer, to simply call the police. But something told me this moment would define everything. She was at my doorstep, and it was time to confront her once and for all. I opened the door slowly, Noah still in my arms. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking but determined. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, as if I were the one who had wronged her. "I've been thinking," she said softly, her voice almost too calm. "I think you need help. You can't do this on your own. You're not capable of taking care of Noah." I laughed bitterly. "You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do with my son. You've lost that right." Her eyes hardened. "I'm still his grandmother. I still have a say in this." I took a step forward, my voice unwavering. "No, you don't. Not anymore. You're not his mother. You're not his guardian. And if you try anything else, I'll make sure you never see him again." She stared at me, her lips curling into a tight smile. "You're making a mistake. This isn't over." And with that, she turned and walked away. But as she disappeared into the night, I knew it wasn't just an empty threat. The battle between us wasn't over. My mother was relentless, and I couldn't let my guard down now. Not for a second. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. I kept checking the locks, double and triple checking that everything was secure. My mother was still out there somewhere plotting. I could feel it. I contacted my attorney again, desperate for some form of reassurance. Janelle had seen cases like mine before. She told me the court ruling was clear. My mother had no legal standing to claim Noah as her own. But that didn't stop her from trying. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I received another piece of mail. This time, the envelope was addressed to Noah. Inside, I found a stack of documents, legal papers from my mother's lawyer, claiming that they were reopening the case. They wanted a second trial. They were coming after my son again. My heart sank into my stomach. I had thought it was over. I thought the fight was done. But she wasn't finished yet. This time, though, I knew better. I wouldn't let her take him again. Janelle and I immediately began preparing for the next round of legal battles. We gathered even more evidence, combed through the past months to show how far my mother would go to destroy my family. This time, we would not allow her to manipulate the court or anyone else. She had crossed a line. The new trial date was set within a week. Felt like the world was closing in around me. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. I couldn't think about anything else. But when the day of the trial arrived, something shifted. I stood before the judge once more, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. But this time I was stronger. I was prepared. And most importantly, I wasn't alone. The evidence was clear. The manipulation, the harassment, the lies. It was all there for everyone to see. Janelle presented everything meticulously, proving that my mother's actions had no place in our family. She had no right to take Noah away. And when my mother stood to speak, her voice cracked under the pressure. She was no longer the strong, confident woman I had once feared. Now she looked fragile, exposed. The judge, after reviewing everything, made his final ruling. My mother was not to contact me or Noah again. Her attempts at gaining custody were dismissed. There would be no more battles, no more threats, no more fear. It was over. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long finally lifted. Noah was safe. Our future was ours to shape. The nightmares were behind us. And as I stood in the courtroom watching my mother leave, I finally understood one thing. The fight was never really about her taking Noah. It was about my ability to protect him, to fight for him with everything I had. The battle was over, but the victory